We have 5 of the 7 board members present.
I think we're live.
Yes, we are. All right. I'd like to call to order the special meeting of Joint Development Authority for Athens-Clarke County and Winterville. Let me bring up my agenda. I just called. Do I have a motion to approve the agenda for today, assuming everybody had a chance to look it over?
So moved.
Second.
All right. Could you say your name so we know who's who?
Stephanie moved to motion to approve the agenda.
Erica second.
Okay, thank you.
Who's taking the minutes right now, by the way? Tim is not here.
Tim let me know that he was going to be on the move during the meeting, so he might be able to check in, but I told him I'm glad to take the minutes today.
Thank you.
All right, so we have a motion and a second to approve the agenda. All those in favor, say aye.
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 All those opposed? All right, the agenda has been approved. Next item on our agenda is the approval of minutes from our last meeting. I hope you've all had a chance to look at them. We can do we have an motion to approve the minutes of the last meeting?
This is Kelly. So move.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
All right, time for this open for discussion. I did have just a couple of things that I saw that I recommend that we change. Let me bring up my Word document. We most of the time in the minutes we say what the actual vote result is, but approval for agenda minutes and those two did not have a vote tally. So I recommend that we do the same thing as approval by unanimous vote acclamation for those 2 items, to add that to the minutes.
Glad to do that.
Technically, it should say by unanimous vote of the directors or something like that. If it's not stated to be unanimous, you have to list each person and how they voted.
Okay.
Right. We haven't had a roll call vote yet, but so you want to say approval by unanimous vote by acclamation of the board? Of the directors?
Acclamation isn't a legal word in
okay.
under the open records law.
Okay, so you tell me how I should word it, and that's what I'll go and fix it.
The directors unanimously approve the motion.
Okay.
Okay. So we'll do that on every place we have a motion and a second. Because everything was by vote on all the. All right, and then the last thing that I had was the adjournment. We didn't have a time listed for. But
Somebody's dog.
hi, doggies.
Sorry.
Anyway, that's the only other thing that I thought we should
Okay.
add to the minutes is the actual time we adjourned.
Okay.
So is that agreeable with everybody?
Yep.
Unanimously. Yes.
Okay.
I'll make those changes.
All right. So any other discussion of the motion? I'm sorry. My son's trying to call. Probably talk to him a while. All right. So there are no other discussion in the minutes.
To refine my motion to approve minutes with those changes.
Okay. I do have a second to that modification.
Second.
All right. All those in favor of the motion as modified, say aye.
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 All those opposed? Okay. Motion carries as is correctly stated. All right. The next agenda item is old business. And it's the continued discussion in RLF. Ilka, do you want to bring up that document and share it so we can look at it?
Yes, give me 1 second and I'll surf over that way. Okay. All right, let me make it a little bigger for y'all.
Yeah, if you could, that'd be great.
How's that? Okay.
My feeble eyes can see it.
I can make it a little bigger.
Just a tiny. That's good. Thank you.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
All right. Trying to see where we left off. We started, well, we were getting, next thing was the discussion of the emergency phase lending. And we've got listed here maximum loan of $500. We were deadline 3 weeks from application open date. Is that all acceptable to everybody?
I have a thing that I would like to recommend that we consider for the financial requirement. If you guys might let me show you some things.
Yeah, I looked through your PowerPoint presentation. If you
Are you able to take it over, Steph?
Yes.
Okay.
So I want to make sure everyone has seen it and can contribute or whatever.
Can you put it on the screen?
Yep.
Good.
I am about to. So I guess you can see it now.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. The first thing I wanted to talk about was the non-financial eligibility, and you can see these things listed here. One in red that I have, and I'm wondering, should we add the amendment that you're only eligible if you did not receive PPP or EIDL? What do y'all think about that?
Some thoughts about this.
Mm-hmm.
Since these are loans and they are to be repaid, I understand that a lot of people just didn't have banking relationships and didn't get the PPP, and maybe for whatever reason didn't want to apply for the EIDL. But
Right.
my concern is that even if it's only $7,500, that if we're out of money, and we don't know for how long this emergency will continue, maybe, I don't know, because the PPP is forgivable, maybe we shouldn't exclude a business because they received that. If they didn't, they may not survive to repay the loan.
That will, I hear your point, and I troubled with that myself. But maybe as we walk through these slides, we can see, because I actually have one of the companies in here. It's a real company, I'm just not identifying it, that did get it and what effect that has. So we don't have to do that. It was just an idea, but maybe we don't even need to, because with the extra criteria I suggest we add, it might handle itself. So let's go forward and look through a little bit more. When I have this in screen show view, it takes over my whole screen, so I'm going to have it in this view. I'm sorry, it doesn't look as good. So the current recommendation is the greater than or equal to 25% loss of revenue over 30 days. It's not very specific about which 30 days, so my thinking is that March, half of that month was messed up and half maybe right. April may be too far back, so I thought we could use May and look at their May 2020, that's a 30-day period, and May 2019 for reference for what a normal month would look like. And that is where we could look at the 25% loss of revenue. The pros of using only this is there's less documentation. We just need a P&L for both of those. The cons are it doesn't provide enough information about need or risk, and it might be difficult to get very current returns because people do quarterly in smaller businesses, if they even do them during the year, and they don't typically have profit and loss statements for the quarter that we're currently in, and we're in the second quarter. So my thinking is that they probably won't have those at their fingertips. It could present a barrier. But if we add this additional criteria that not only should they have more than a 25% loss of revenue, maybe we should look at days of cash on hand. And I picked 90 because it's a quarter. And also in 3 months, maybe things will be more normalized if we're lucky. And it's like if they can live 90 days without our help, they're probably going to make it. I don't know. I'm not a future teller, but they're more likely to make it. They would have to give us a P&L and a balance sheet for a year-long period. Now, I put March 15th to March 15th because it is the year directly before the crisis began, but we could just say 2019, the fiscal year, or people's calendar year. It does provide a full picture of profitability, debt load, and cash burn rate if you get these two financial statements. Is there a lot of feedback for you guys? I can hear feedback.
I can hear some sort of buzzing in the background. I don't know where it's coming from.
Yes.
Somebody
hear
doesn't
it.
have their mute on. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that might be it. That's better. Okay.
Yeah.
Like I said, the prior quarter financial documents are easier to get because they're not so current. But the cons are that it requires more documents. Now, I would like to say that 1 out of 5 businesses do not use electronic accounting. No matter what we do, they're not going to have these documents. So we could use bank statements, but we'd have to get a whole year's worth of bank statements and then run all the calculations for them. I don't know how to handle that situation, but that is how it's handled. It's using bank statements. But some people mix business with personal, and it's not clean and easy to see. Let's deal with that when it comes, if we have that situation.
Stephanie, I have a
Yes.
question for you.
Yes.
My understanding is the balance sheet is a snapshot at a given point in time.
It is.
So, I understand the P&L we could do for a whole year or whatever, but, a balance statement is only for on a specific date. This is
Yes.
where the assets and liabilities are. So we need to decide what balance sheet we're going to require of them.
Well, what we're trying to see isn't what their debt is today, it's what their debt is in general. And even if that ends on March 15th, it showed us if they were deep in debt prior to this event, which is what I'm looking at. Now, I'm not even using that as a criteria. It's informational, and it could, if we have a situation where someone looks like we should give it to them, we're like, oh my God, they have $1 million in debt and no cash. There's no way they're going to stay in business. This $7,500 is not going to help them. That might be information that would be useful to us. But the real reason I want them is so that we can see how many asset accounts, checking accounts they have. Because the other thing we're going to ask for are bank statements. And if they only give us 1 bank statement, but they have 5 bank accounts, we wouldn't know that without a balance sheet.
So balance sheets usually enumerate all of the.
Yes, they do.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. Okay. So
All right. So we have here a proposal. Go ahead.
Okay.
Keep going.
I just want to work through these to explain to you what the 90-day thing does for us, how it helps us. These are 4 example companies. They are real companies. You don't know who they are, and so I'm not disclosing their personal financial information. But in these 4 examples, the first company does not have more than a 25% loss, but they do not have more than 90 days of cash. Like, they're going to go out of business in 3 months if they don't get some kind of help. Should they be eligible? I don't know, but by this criteria, if we use it, yes, they would be. The 4th company has both a 25% loss and less than 90 days of cash. Are they going to be in business in 90 days? Probably not. Probably not even as long as this company will, because this company is at least not losing money as fast. And these other 2 wouldn't meet because they have plenty of cash. And this is what I wanted to work through, is what effect this would have if we add it. So this is a heating and air company. They've been open for 2 years, 3 employees. They don't have any revenue loss, and they have 31 days of cash on hand. So my justification is, while they don't have revenue loss, they are likely to go under further duress without additional infusion of cash. So let me show you the data. May 2019, and these are the records I'm suggesting we collect for them. The comparison of month over month for 1 month, that 30-day period, 15,000 in 2019 and 22,000 in 2020. So they did not have a loss, they had a gain of 7,000. So by just using the 25% loss, we would not be able to help this company. But if we dig a little deeper into their real situation, right here, we can see that the profit and loss shows us they have 81,000 in annual expense. There's 365 days a year. So to stay open, they need $222 a day to keep their doors open. They have $6,000 of cash on hand, so 31 days. If it doesn't turn around for them, even though they did not have a loss, they cannot continue operating. So to me, that's a company that we might consider helping. What do y'all think about that company?
So this is Erica. So we're essentially, if they got the full amount of the loan, that would be $7,500. It's basically
right.
buying them another 40 days.
Yes, that's right.
And so we have to decide if 40 days more is going to be enough for them to survive and
That's right.
start paying off debt that they incurred during this time.
Yes, you're getting to the root of the problem with $7,500, that the companies most in need probably can't get enough extra days with that $7,500 to even make a difference. And we'll see that as we work through these other examples. So yes, that's very observant. And I actually have a spreadsheet where I worked all through that to see how that would come out. This company had a 58% loss. Now they're a rental company, so of course they were letting people not pay their rent. That makes sense. But they have 133 days of cash on hand. So let's look at this. Last year they had 21,000 of rental income. This year 9,000. 50% of their clients can't pay their rent. Totally makes sense. They would be eligible if we just use that one criteria.
May I interject there? I'm sorry. Okay, and a company like this, it's a rental company, they have assets. So they could also leverage their property.
They can.
If they have 4 months worth of cash on hand to float them, and this goes on longer than 4 months, they have other opportunities.
That's right.
That's why to leverage their assets.
I say they are not eligible. They should not be eligible because look, they have 133 days of cash on hand because it cost them 359 days to be open. $359.
Yeah, so this is a little bit sticky because I think we also need to have them. And anytime you apply for loans, they have you list your assets and liabilities, and I think that we really need to consider that for every risk. Because if they have an alternative route to raise capital, maybe we should be giving more capital to the businesses that don't have assets they can leverage.
Well, luckily we are asking for a balance sheet, so we can easily see that. And it's unlikely that people acquired assets after the event occurred than before. So most likely we'll have their real assets on their older balance sheet. Now, there are places like, let's say Sine, for instance, they have assets, they have a building, but they can't operate without it, so they don't have an option to sell it. So in a property rental company, they don't own the property necessarily. They rent it as a service. So it's not a property ownership, it's a rental company. So they wouldn't have the assets on their books anyways, but in some cases you might find that, yes. But we're not requiring collateral, from what I understand. We can disqualify anyone for anything, but if we're going to disqualify someone for something, we should say that, in my opinion. Because why would you waste the time to do it if you knew that you weren't eligible? If someone said, oh, if you have $1 million in assets, you're not eligible. Well, probably $7,500 isn't attractive to them anyways. Third company, they don't meet either. It seems like a very small company, but they had 24,000 more dollars in sales this May than last May, so they wouldn't be eligible. And They have $132,000 of cash on hand, 203 days. This particular company did get one of those loans, EIDL or PPP, I can't remember which one, but I think that is reflected in their cash balance right now. So that's why I was saying maybe we don't even have to say that, because if you got any amount of sizable loan from either of those programs, your cash on hand will likely be inflated beyond what it typically is anyways. And they wouldn't meet the requirements. And then the last company is one that meets both requirements. They were down $6,300, so 25.33%, right on the edge. And they have only $18,000, which is 41 days of operating left in the bank. They would be eligible. Now, the question is, just because you meet these criteria, maybe the criteria are too bad so that we're inviting failure. And that's a question we have to ask ourselves. What do y'all think about that?
Well, you know, the issue back to the $7,500, you know, if let's just look at the criteria of cash on hand. If we loan them $7,500 and their burn through rate gets them up to beyond 3 months, which is what we were thinking would be they'd be able to survive, then that would be, you know, maybe we would consider that. But if they can't meet that 90-day criteria with a $7,500 loan, I'm not sure we should be giving them a loan.
And that's a really good point. So I had looked at this to say, based on their daily cash burn, if we were to give each of these companies $7,500, what extra days would it buy them? And only the first example, they'd get 34 extra days, but it still doesn't take them to 90 days. So what we're going to end up doing is loaning money to a bunch of companies that may probably be successful without the $7,500. Here we may loan money to companies that it may bridge them to where they can get a better foothold on, or maybe they've applied for PPP or EIDL and they haven't gotten it yet. Like it might give them a life preserver to get to the next point in the river. And these things you can't predict. So when we think about the diversity of businesses that we want to reach, and Ilka can talk about some types that might not even have these kind of records, we are going to have to accept more risk because we are calling this an emergency loan, not a business development loan. It's emergency. So we should expect that we're going to have some emergency situations where it doesn't look good on paper, and it never will.
So Stephanie, you want me to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, particularly the hair salon scenario you told me about.
So in reaching out to different stakeholders throughout our community to talk with them, some of the folks that I spoke with that are active in the Black community, either owning a business or working with multiple business owners, they mentioned that one of the most common business types in the Black community in Athens is hair salons. And the way that those salons many times are structured as a business is that the owner owns the facility, and then the stylists are contractors. So they essentially are paying a certain amount to the owner each month for their chair and for utilities and everything. And their challenge is they're not able really to take advantage of the PPP because they don't have people on payroll. But the fact that people aren't able to work still affects their business and their ability to pay their rent and their mortgage. So just kind of thinking about, and then another structure would be like a transportation company, maybe that owns buses, but the bus drivers are contractors rather than employees.
Yeah. I kept going back in my mind, like, what if it was just the 25% loss? But then I start looking at the companies where they had the revenue loss, but they have so much cash that it doesn't seem fair to give them more money when there are companies really in need. This company is not that much in need. In 4 months, if we're not out of this, we're all in trouble. So let's just gonna say in 4 months, everything's gonna be perfect. They're gonna be fine. And if we just have the 25%, they're gonna be eligible for that and another business will not be. And that's kind of why I wanted to add that. But, you know, maybe the number has to be less than 60 days or more than 90 days. Like, show us that you're not gonna go out of business so we know you're gonna pay us back. But I'm torn about that because I want to help businesses that are really struggling. And those are the ones who could not get PPP or EIDL because they're too small and they didn't have banking relationships. And there you have a lot of those minority businesses in that exact boat. And they're going to miss this if we don't put that in place.
What's our tolerance for failure?
You know, for me personally, it's not my money. So it's hard for me to say that, but my tolerance is that my feeling is that this money is not going to leave Athens. It's going into the pockets of someone in Athens. It will be spent in Athens. It will not leave our community. So if we give this money out and we lose 20% of it, I'm personally and morally okay with that. But I am not the one that in the end has to say, why did taxpayer money get recouped? We're all that way. And I'm a public administrator just like you all are, but I'm okay with that because I would rather these businesses survive because in the long run, if they employ people and they produce income and they can stay in business, the chance we're taking is worth it to me.
I didn't hear anything wrong with that, but let me just offer for guidance. If we end up with a program where there are 20% losses under these circumstances, I think that's okay. If you make a loan and think that there's maybe a 20% chance of it not getting repaid, that's okay. If you make a loan and don't think it will be repaid, but it will fall into that overall 20% category, that's not okay.
Right, yes.
You shouldn't be making that loan. And one final observation, and I'm kind of preaching to the choir, I know y'all know this, but public officials, which is what y'all are in a situation like this, you really should treat it like it is your own money. So that's enough preaching. I'll be quiet for now.
I will say if this was my own money, I would take a risk on some of these businesses.
Well, I thought the same thing. As soon as the words were out of my mouth, I'd do the same thing, but you know, we're constrained.
I understand. I mean, this is a big struggle for me because I was a business person. I can see the signs of a struggling business. I know if one is on the edge of failure, but I also know being in that position many times that it was a client not paying us that was putting us in that position.
Mm-hmm.
And I just needed to get to a point where I could pay the bills I needed to until this client could pay their own bills, which was probably another client not paying them. So I've played that game and I know how difficult it is to trust that a company can succeed, but sometimes you get that one that really does it and it makes the difference for all the ones that failed. And that's because they end up employing people.
And in your example, if you inject money at the right level in that chain, you save all those businesses.
It is true. It is true. This is my personal feeling. I'm more risk averse than most people because I was a business owner, and Erica, you were too. We know what that risk is like, but we also know we can see a business that can't get out from under itself, and there are going to be some of those that apply, and we will have to reject them. But the ones that are on the edge and they look like they could make it, even if it's a risk, I think we should help them.
Could we rethink capping it at 7,500 because that may not be as helpful for some of the businesses that might make it if we could get them to that 90-day. You know,
yeah,
if we could,
it would be great. Mm-hmm.
Is there any reason that we couldn't say, you know, okay, we'll take a look at your books and we'll make you an offer, and this is what we can offer you. You can either accept it or not accept it.
I think the limitation, number one, if there's not a legal limitation, because we haven't decided this yet, but every business that you do that with, it takes away the ability to help another business that may have less need or more need. So like we're just not able to stretch the money as far and touch as many businesses. But yes, I totally agree with you. If you give someone to 3 months, that's great.
Yeah, I'm just thinking that if we make 100 $7,500 loans and 20% of those businesses fail, that's $150,000
Yeah.
that just walks away. Not that it walks away, okay, it's back in the community in other ways, but it might be a bit irresponsible where we could actually float fewer businesses and keep them alive, and then they'll be here for years. And the optics of that money being paid back and then being reloaned because it's revolving later for different reasons might be better.
I like the idea of that personally, but we do have to probably set a floor and say, if you have 10 days of cash on hand, we cannot make you an 80-day loan. It's got to be somewhere between your 30 and 90, and we're making you whole for that 3 months or something like that.
I would be comfortable with that. I would say if you've got 30 days of cash in the bank, we can loan you 60 days and call it that. And of course, not any crazy amount. We could still set a ceiling up
Yeah, we
to
will
so
have
much.
to.
Yeah. But I think maybe making 100 or so $7,500 loans might not achieve our overarching goal.
I think that's a good point. What does everybody else think about that?
I like the idea of having that buffer on either end. The other component, and this comes from my work in education and human services, is really perhaps some stipulation, some requirement that you're agreeing to enter into some kind of financial counseling relationship. And so, I mean, invariably, people are going to be in 50 different weird and tough spots. And, we have in the sort of addendum here, this whole set of community resources. I certainly don't want to see somebody in a tough spot and have them not avail themselves of some of those resources, whether it's SBDC or, our own HCD or some of the other programming that's here in town. I don't know exactly what that looks like in terms of a stipulation, but one thought.
I'm not opposed to that if we have a partner that will serve in that role.
So they agreed the first time we talked about this idea of if a business is awarded a loan, would y'all be available to work with them? So it's not just a loan, but it's also coaching, as Kelly mentioned. And they were very open-armed about it. They said, yes, we would love to work with those businesses.
For free?
Well, SBDC has been doing that as part of COVID already.
Okay.
SCORE does that it's a volunteer network that does that already in Athens. Goodwill has a Good Biz program that works with micro enterprises. Athens Land Trust also does some coaching and sort of business development. So we do have a number of local groups that have agreed that they would be willing to assist.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So how do we hold them accountable for seeking that counseling and participating? And what are the repercussions if they don't? Can we call the loan? I like the idea. It's a good idea, but we need to.
Maybe it's a front end requirement rather than oh crap, I'm just about to default on this requirement. So maybe it happens pre-delivery of loan.
Yeah, like you could approve them, but say you got to go have this counseling, send us this form that show you finished it. Like when you get divorced, you have to sign that form saying you went to divorce counseling. Then they could get the loan.
Thanks for bringing that up, Stephanie. I appreciate it.
I'm making notes. Thanks.
I do like that.
Yeah, I think that, yeah, we can't give them the money and then say, oh, and by the way, you need to go take a class. Maybe have them take the class first and get some sort of information that they've done before we just give them money.
Yeah.
I think it also helps on the front end with the referral pipeline because those groups are already working with many businesses right now. So they also have a sense of who might be able to benefit from it. Who's in a state sort of in their status is just what y'all have been talking about in terms of cash on hand, where this might be helpful for them, especially if we're kind of communicating the criteria at the same time.
So it sounds like what we're saying is that we like the 25% loss thing. That's a good criteria to set, but also that we have a criteria that you must have somewhere between 30 and 90. I don't know how to say this, but if you have between 30 and 90 days of cash left in your bank account, operating account, then you would be eligible. But if you have less than 30 and more than 90, you're not going to be eligible. Is that what we're saying?
I think so. That narrows it down.
And that we're not going to say it's a $7,500 loan. It is a loan dependent on your cash needs.
We'll make you an offer. Yeah. And I mean, at this point, also, there shouldn't be a business that doesn't know what they're spending every day. I mean, they should be watching it carefully and making adjustments.
I think that you're right in the most part, but I promise you there are businesses that have zero idea about that because they don't look at it. They just don't stay on top of it.
Oh, God. Oh, God.
It's true.
That would keep me up at night.
I know. Well, that's what I had to offer. And so I'm going to pull off and let this meeting go back to David to manage.
Okay. So there's, the idea of, in terms of the economics of having that 25% loss, is that something that everybody's comfortable with as a criteria?
I am.
And then we also talked about basically having a minimum and maximum range for these loans. And I think we need to set that if we're going to do that. I personally would like to see that if we loan them whatever it is within that range, that it will take them to a 90-day cash flow. I don't know whether that, because to me that's a higher chance of success than if they're not that.
Let me share my screen one more time and let's just do a quick calculation on something and see how that turns out. Because we could see like what these numbers would turn into. Do y'all see this spreadsheet here?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So if I were to change the loan amount on example 1 to, let's say, 11,000, that gives them 49 extra days. What's that added up to? 80?
Mm-hmm.
That's still not quite 90. I'm looking for probably 13,000. So that's how much we would have to loan them to get them to 90 days. That's not a small chunk of change there. These guys wouldn't be eligible at all because they have too much. But these people here, I mean, their burn rate is so high. That's the issue. This one is at least a low. So your daily burn rate, Erica, I don't want to butt into your personal business, but when you were running Square One, could you recall what maybe your daily burn rate was just in general as a restaurant?
Yeah, well, I can reverse engineer that. If I think about what the bare minimum for a month would be. So it's a lot because if you're considering like
payroll,
payroll and rent and utilities and stuff, it's a couple $1,000s a day. Remember that it's a large building. I think that we wouldn't be the kind of business that would qualify for this because, and also we have the asset. We always own the property as part of the business model. And then also for a restaurant that rents, restaurants are risky. It's so risky and expensive, and the margins are tiny. I don't recommend it. Don't do it. Yeah, it's not for the faint of heart. I think maybe if we consider some other economic factors like how many employees they have. So if we're talking about a company that's like 1 to 3 employees, it should be in their daily overhead. It should be lower.
Yes.
But we're not really helping as many people. But if you're looking at a business that has, say, 12 employees, and you loan them $13,000, now you're keeping a dozen people employed.
For maybe
those
a month, though. That's not even a payroll for 1 month.
I'm not talking about a restaurant. I'm talking about maybe
Okay.
some other business that has that many people working. You know, I don't know. I don't have a specific industry in mind, but that might be something that we consider as well. Like how many people will still have a job if we look at this business? And, you know, of course we have to set a parameter so that people know what to expect, but.
Well, when you think about that amount of money and you think about any business that's paying a living wage, they're paying someone at least $3,000 a month to work there full time. Hopefully, at least a $7,500 loan might buy them 1 month if they have 2 employees. So,
depending on what they have on hand, right? So
that's true. Yes.
So if they have 60 days in the bank, that's an easy fix. We can easily get them. So I think that we've answered. The question is, what's our risk tolerance? Maybe 13,000 is not our risk tolerance, but if we can loan them, you know, 12,000, so much less risky, and that gets them to the 90 days, and they can keep their employees. That might be, I don't know.
So when we talked about this thing, the eligibility criteria, the non-financial was 1 to 20 employees. I honestly think a company that has 20 employees, $7,500 is not going to do anything for them. I think we're probably more in the 1 to 10 employees and probably the 1 to 5 employees kind of businesses that might be eligible. But even a 1 employee business, do you really think? I mean, I don't devalue that because I was once a 1-person business and I turned into a 12-person business. So I don't know that we should devalue the 1-person businesses either.
Do we want to start really small scale just in this initial emergency phase and say, let's go ahead in the emergency period and look at that 1 to 10?
I think so. Because if you had 20 employees and you did not apply for PPP or EIDL, you either didn't need it or you just you're not going to make it. I mean, you're just not. Unless people were on unemployment this whole time and now they're getting to the point where they're kicking them off of unemployment. And then that's a whole different issue. But $7,500 is not going to fix it for a 20 employee company.
So are we then looking at a 1 to 10?
I think we should, honestly. And Ilka, what number of companies had 1 to 10 employees in your list? I can't remember. Because you looked at the 20 employee cap.
Let me just pull it up really quick. It's on the drive. Hold on. Give me 1 second. It looks like 1 employee was about 1,300. 2 to 3 employees was a little over 1,700.
Those are going to be the ones that we probably get applications from. I mean, there's a lot. And we could help a lot of those actually, because they don't need a lot to stay open. I don't know, maybe we just see what we get. Just by letting people apply doesn't mean that we owe them anything. Maybe we see what we get and maybe we don't get that many.
Are we obligated to spend all of it?
Not right now.
Okay. And I'm only saying that because you're right. If we only get, you know, like 10 applications,
then we're lucky. We're happy. That means people are doing okay.
Or we're not communicating.
Jinx, buy me a Coke.
You have a great mind.
Okay. So that's all I have to say about the financial part. Maybe we don't have to decide this today, and maybe we could all think on it, and the next time we talk, say yes or no or whatever. But the public benefit commitment was something else that, you know, was, I don't know how I feel about all these things on here, but it was a good start. So why don't we talk about those?
Yeah, let's think about the criteria in terms of financials and maybe talk about it, try to solidify it at our next meeting.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm fine with 1 to 10 instead of 1 to 20. Seems to me, you know, a business of one is really like a solopreneur.
It is, yeah.
You know, it's almost like being self-employed as far as I'm concerned. But
it could also include those like hair salons and things like that that have one official employee and the others are contractors.
yeah, I understand. Okay, is everybody fine with talking about the public benefits section?
Sure, yeah.
Yes.
Okay, let's move on to that. Could you, whoever's got the screen of it, could it
Oh, yeah, stop.
make it big enough so we can see it?
Are y'all seeing my screen still? Okay.
Yeah.
Is that bigger?
It's hard to read at that.
1 minute, I'm gonna zoom in.
Now we did have Ilka making changes. I want to make sure that we have one person capturing all the changes that we want made.
Yeah, I'm not gonna make changes. Ilka, why don't you just
Why don't we put Ilka back on and her
yeah,
screen?
you
So
take it.
there we go. Make it a little bit bigger to read. There you go. Okay, let's see. A little bit farther. I think, is it not? Slide down to the emergency loan section.
I was actually editing a Word document the other day. Let me pull up the one that,
It was on Google Drive, wasn't it?
yes, but I've got the same version over here on Word.
So yeah, we have a PDF. I don't think it's editable.
Yeah. Yeah. Let me share this correct.
I might still be on the phone at 5, so you probably need to text David.
Okay, if you just make it a little bit bigger. I can read that. Can everybody else read that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so back down to the section. All right, so we've tabled the eligibility criteria. Did we decide to change that to 10? So we can make that change, all right.
Yeah.
Okay, so now the public benefit commitment.
You know, that first one that says you're going to operate at a level not less than X% of pre-COVID, you know, people I'm sure want to do that, but are you thinking of something like 50%? Because if it's near 100%, that might be impossible for some businesses right now.
This was one that I think I just cut and pasted from a document that Dan had shared with me as some examples. So we can tweak these however y'all think would be good. These were just some examples that he shared that fit the idea of promoting trade industry and agriculture.
And is this an after the loan is finished, Dan, or before the loan is given that they have to demonstrate that they are operating at a X% of operations?
We can deal with that different ways. Again, these are ideas accompanied by a plea for more and better ideas. But if we're looking at the first bullet point, we'll stay open and operate at a level not less than blank % of its operations. I guess that does need clarification, and I'm trying to stay away from comprehensive loan documents. The point was made earlier that if you approach the financials in a certain way, it's a glance at the financials to verify that what you're looking for is there, as opposed to go into a lot of trouble. We need to go into as much trouble as we need to go to, but not anymore, because we're trying to get the money out, and we're dealing with a lot of small businesses, as was said earlier too. So here, rather than providing for a separate loan document with a lot of definitional stuff, my hope is that the guidelines will be definite enough that I can have a promissory note that cross-references an application where they select one or more of these things, and the guidelines which provide enough detail. So it'd be great if we could flesh this out with enough detail. But this can really mean whatever you want it to mean, although we should, the very fact the question was asked means that more detail was needed. So a level of not less than, my thought really was kind of on a weighted average basis during the period of the loan. And so you could say that you're starting out at a lower level. As the economy recovers, your level will increase, and you'll go above whatever figure is in that blank. And then on a monthly average basis, you will end up on average hitting at least that percentage is one way to do it. There are others. So it's however the board feels most comfortable, realizing that we're not trying to comply with a specific legal requirement. The legal requirement is general. And because of that, as long as we're reasonable in what we do, it's okay. So I'm going to toss that question back to the board.
Well, the way it's worded is that they have to state this for consideration of a loan. In other words, they almost have to say that they're already operating at X% of its operating levels.
Well, will is future tense. So if they get the loan, that'll be one of the ingredients that it takes for them to be able to do it. But it's prospective after the date of the loan and throughout the loan period.
And
Thinking about this in conjunction with our sort of pre-loan counseling discussion, maybe that's packaged together. And so we say, you need to be able to demonstrate a plan to operate at least 50% of your pre-COVID status for a period of at least 6 months following receipt of the loan, or something like that. I'm just throwing those out as placeholder numbers, but.
Yeah.
And we're not talking about employees here. We're talking about that they're generating the revenue that they were generating before.
I have to say this, just using the restaurant business as an example, you're operating with less density, so you've had to reduce your seating. People are afraid to go out. To hold them to a revenue threshold, it's a little bit unfair if you're talking about a restaurant or a hairdresser or any number of businesses where a retail store where people are afraid to go in. Maybe maintaining hours and keeping payroll at a certain level, because remember, the more hours that people are open, the more payroll they're going to incur, the higher their utilities go. So we should talk about percentages, like industry standard percentages, depending on what kind of a business it is. Because I know that, Square is operating at reduced hours. They're operating, but not as many people are coming in. Everything's at reduced hours. Gyms are at reduced hours because there's more time needed for cleaning and fewer people are coming out. So
that approach is exactly what I had in mind when I wrote this. And you could be more specific. You could say, hey, stay open at least half the number of days you used to stay open, for at least half the number of hours that you used to stay open, but at least half the wait people that you had before. Again, it's whatever we feel like is reasonable and specific and helpful.
Yeah, the revenue standard is unfair to most businesses that require customers.
That makes sense.
Yeah, I agree with that. So maybe we just are more specific to say that you will stay open at least half time and operate at least, or like employ at least half of the staff that you employed before COVID. Now, when do we get confirmation of this? Like, do they have to report to us every month? Because that's just going to be a burden on these businesses.
There needs to be a reporting requirement, and it can be at closeout when the loan is repaid.
Okay.
But you're not getting any. I mean, so if these loans are outstanding a year and a half, and the business is closed, and our money has not been repaid, the public's going to know that. They'll walk by that closed restaurant every day.
Yeah.
So, and I would put in the note anyway that, closing the business allows us to call the note. So, I mean, that particular aspect would be covered. So I would suggest something other than just waiting until, the end of the loan period, but not necessarily every week or every month or even every quarter, just whatever would be a reasonable early warning that we got a problem loan here.
We consider 6 months, or they have to supply some documentation after 6 months.
Semi-annually.
Remind me, when does repayment start? Is it immediately or after a period of time?
I think that I don't actually
We
remember.
proposed that repayment wouldn't occur until June of 2021.
So basically a year.
eligible. Yeah, and then 18 months of repayments. But that's also all up for discussion
Sure.
and negotiation.
I would rather have them check in slightly more frequently than every 6 months, especially if the first payment won't be due for a year. You want to make sure every 90 days at least that, like if we're going to meet every 90 days, we should have them report like a week or two before that so that we have something to talk about and things to look at and see if we're running into trouble anywhere. Also, are we going to have a stipulation in case the pandemic spikes again? And
I know.
and people run for cover, whether it's required or not.
You mean to extend the loan?
I'm talking, I don't even know what kind of stipulations we would have. Would we just pause everything at that point?
If I'm a banker and I write a lot of documents for bankers and in bond deals, what you want is something that is clear and enforceable and in your favor, because your borrower can always come back for an indulgence and you can always give it to them. In the public sector, you can't just give stuff away, including loan forbearance. You've got to get something in exchange, but that doesn't have to be much. So unless you want to signal to the world that this is a soft requirement, which might not be good because then people would expect to be indulged, I would think we'd have something that would be more business-like, but emergency circumstances, but leave it to them to come back, for us to introduce a refunding program. The federal government's doing something like that now with some of the stuff that they've done because it didn't quite work the way that it wanted to. So my thought would be to kind of start out with a good program, and if things change again, change the program.
Yeah.
Kim, it seems like somebody has a background conversation going on. Could they mute their mic if they've got background stuff going on, unless you're speaking? Thanks. Back to this first bullet, we talked about hours, number of staff, percentages of staff. Do we want to be that granular?
I mean, we're going to have to ask for numbers from them, something that's reportable. And so we have to kind of be specific so that they can report to us those numbers into a format that can be looked at, I think.
Yeah.
Number of employees is part of their business license.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we already have an idea of how many 40-hour employees they have, or part-time people that add up to 40 hours.
So we would use their most recent business license filing to look at what their number of employees is, you're saying, Erica?
Yeah, they're pre-COVID. Some of them may have streamlined their operations, so they may not have as many employees. So maybe, yeah, 50%, I would say would be a good number, a good indicator that they're trying to stay open.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Was there a third
And
criteria other than hours and staff that we were talking about?
I think if we can keep it that little, that's something easy to get those numbers and probably not too difficult for someone to prove. If that reaches the public benefit threshold we need to reach. Dan?
Yeah, I think, again, there's no special rules that we have to follow. Is this a reasonable means? Is that a good enough indicator? To me, it is. I mean, you might have that model weights jobs over others. But every business is, except maybe a sole proprietorship, is going to have employees. So it's as good a measure as any to me.
Mm-hmm. Will that requirement apply to a one-person business? Because if they're still there, then they're one person and they're 100% open, right?
They are.
Well, we can have a rounding error, round up to the nearest employee.
Okay. The second comment in there, Ilka, I was wondering why it was in that sentence and why it couldn't just be its own bullet. The reasonably accommodate requests to recruit new economic development.
That's from the kind of the wording that Dan had. So we could.
Because I could see that as a totally separate thing and also easy to satisfy.
What does that mean in practice?
Well, that's what I'm kind of wondering that as well.
Let me give you some examples. You see that more often with traditional county economic development projects. So, for example, if you've got an industry visiting, Caterpillar did this. One of the first things they do is to want to meet with existing industry to find out what it's like to do business in the community, what the workforce is like, what problems they have had. So you could get an existing industry to accommodate, for example, meeting requests. And to get some money to a regional airport, I've had the airport agree that they'll put up, and this may have been in Brunswick or someplace like that, they'd put up signs and allow literature to be distributed that would promote tourism destinations. Or they would make their conference rooms available for prospect meetings if needed. It's intended to be light, and it's intended not to burden them to do anything that they mind doing. But if we left it open-ended, where we might ask them for something or we might not, then it's not really consideration. It's consideration if you do it, but not if you don't.
But if they agree that they will do it and we never ask them, that's not their fault. They're agreeing to it.
I could probably get comfortable with that because a promise is consideration in contract law.
Mm-hmm.
But when you're trying to satisfy the constitutional prohibition on gifts and gratuities, among other things, it depends on the type of promise. If there's a way we could be more specific in terms of, participate in recruiting new economic development, maybe we say something like meet at least once with the JDA over the loan period to get informed as to something like that, so that they have to do something, no matter how small.
I think that's reasonable. Maybe they come and meet with us and talk to us about how that loan helped them, and we can use it as marketing material to, communicate with other agencies that might need it.
That's good.
Yeah, be available for an interview by our public information office to be a part of that kind of promotional material.
Good.
It would be good publicity for the county to have local businesses saying how great it is to do business here.
It's kind of like First American's ad campaign when they had all their businesses they loan money to do billboards saying that they're a First American company.
Yeah.
Something along those lines?
Yeah, I like it.
Mhm. And break it into a separate bullet.
And I have a question also. So we haven't discussed geography at all, but since this is a joint development authority, what percentage of the loans should come to businesses in Winterville instead of just in the county?
I had exactly that discussion with leadership, and the answer was it's all one big community, and so everybody goes to the same pot, and the candidates are going to be, if we do follow the recommendations here, they'll be scored.
Mhm.
So unless you want to create a set aside, then it's not the first come first serve, but it's the best projects that get it, regardless of where they're located, because it's all in the county.
Right. There are fewer businesses here.
I don't know about you. I don't know about Dodd, but I'm fine with not putting a set aside for Winterville.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
Dan, one more question. Are we telling the businesses that are applying they have to agree to all of these, or they can pick and choose which one and it has to be at least one, or what are our options with that?
It has to be at least one. I thought about that.
Okay,
But
one or more, okay.
if we assign scores to these, you're going to get more points by agreeing to more of them. So
Right.
that's how it corrects.
Okay.
Yeah, I thought we were going to have a scoring mechanism for all of these public benefit commitments.
Mm-hmm. Now, how can you prove that someone purchased goods and services located from business within our jurisdiction?
He's going to be paying invoices, and those invoices will have an address on them.
Most people buy most of their stuff online, it seems. I don't know about that one. I don't know about having the paperwork required to show that they purchased X amount of percent from local businesses, because you might have thousands of invoices in a year.
So that is one thing I want to ask, kind of from a staff perspective, or Dan, from your experience working with third-party lenders, how does it work in terms of this follow-up paperwork? Just in terms of, semi-annually reviewing documentation related to the loan.
I'll give you one example. I helped a Georgia company set up a business in South Carolina, and this must have been 12 years ago, and we're still getting in paperwork from the Department of Commerce in South Carolina. So I wouldn't want to be like that, and particularly since we have a staff of one right now, and she's got other stuff that she has to do too. So something like this could be as simple as a certification, and not even an affidavit, but just a certification, as long as we have audit rights. I certify that I did X percent of these things.
Mm-hmm. I don't know that I like that one. I get the spirit of it, but I don't know if I like it personally for a business owner having to even check to see if they met the requirement. I could see that being very burdensome, because in your QuickBooks account, you don't organize things by where you're buying them. And some people don't even put addresses in accounting systems of where they buy things.
Well, that's a good point. Someone can say, though, that if that's a problem for them, then they ought to choose another bullet point.
Yeah.
And since this is one of many, I could see this being a requirement, but again, sort of a soft one. So if we say, at least 10% of your expenditures are locally based businesses, and you just get bonus points for that.
I'm not opposed to having it. I hope nobody picks it. I don't have to even research it.
Well,
So let's talk about this wording then. Do we want to shift the way this is worded?
I mean, maybe we're just trying to have the spirit of buy local, and maybe it's just that you'll make every effort to buy local where possible.
You see a lot of things that way. The Development Authority of Fulton County's MFBE policy is a lot like that, although they have percentages now. But remember, there has to be it is some consideration to say they will make every effort. And then they could certify at closeout, I have made every effort.
Right.
And that might be enough. but one of my jobs is to keep the board out of trouble. And something like that is not likely to be the subject of some investigation by the Attorney General or audit by anybody. But again, it's a spectrum. And the farther you are along the line of requiring more, the better off the board and the JDA are. So if you decide to say, we'll make every effort, and then there's a certification that I have made every effort, then I'm not going to jump up and down. That's a fact question, whether whether that's good enough or whether it'll work in every case. It's not on its face illegal. So I'm not saying that you can't do that.
So basically it's saying that you're not buying everything you need in your business on the internet, because if you're not buying on the internet, you're buying it somewhere you can drive, which is most likely local. And it's
excuse me for interrupting, but that's a way to add something to that. Say, I will make every effort to buy it locally, including procuring locally goods that could be obtained by online purchasing. That's worth something there.
You could say that.
And that helps the state too, because the state will get sales and use tax revenues out of it.
Yeah.
And so will the local government.
Yeah.
Can you say that one more time? We'll make every effort to purchase
goods and services locally to the extent possible, including buying local in preference over online purchases when local sources are available and competitive. Yeah, the optics on that are real good too. That would look good in the newspaper, something to think about.
And as of April 1st, we're at least supposed to be getting sales tax from his online sales. But we'll see how that pans out.
When that starts April 1st?
Yeah.
Next year or this year?
No, it's supposed to have just started.
So if people buy stuff online in Athens or in Georgia, how are they doing that?
From anywhere in the United States.
I haven't seen that happening yet on the purchasing side.
I'm paying Amazon a lot more sales tax than
Amazon is, but like your other small one-off mom and pop shops, I don't see sales tax being charged in Georgia.
I think there's a minimum size business. You have to be of a certain size to be covered.
Yeah, maybe 250,000 gross a year or something like that. I'm testing my memory to remember exactly what it is, but somewhere in that ballpark.
To the extent possible, including buying locally in preference to online. Okay, yeah, I like it. That sounds better and easier to satisfy. And you know in your brain if you buy most of your stuff online or in person.
That will influence behavior. It really will.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Do we really need more, or is that good now? We have 5. Go ahead,
Dan.
I was just going to say, excuse me for interrupting. If y'all think that'll catch enough qualified applicants, that's plenty. We just need to cast a broad enough net that we're able to help as many folks as we want to help.
Mm-hmm.
What I wanted to just bring up for discussion is the idea of having a weighted criteria for supporting minority businesses, minority-owned businesses, or businesses that given all that we're discussing about all the protests for equality and equal opportunity, I don't know whether we want to do that or not, but I just want to throw that out.
We're just getting into that conversation as a government, and in Georgia, you can track and set desires, but you can't set hard requirements even for a local government. And so if we can't set a hard requirement for ourselves, it's hard for me to imagine that we could absolutely require that.
So you're saying even you can't even set a certain points for a minority-owned business as a part of your overall point system?
That I'm not sure about. Dan, you may have some more familiarity.
I'm not sure either, but I could quickly find out. Half my law firm is labor and employment lawyers. You walk down the hall and you bump into 3 of them. So it'd be easy to find out, and you could award extra points for this where it makes sense.
Are we talking minority and woman-owned businesses, David? Is that fine with you?
Yeah. I actually, in my notes that I mocked up, I put women and minority-owned businesses, and then the other criteria was a certain percentage of minority employees, but that one's probably pretty tough to satisfy.
I'd stay away from that. But the purchases, for example, if you know, but I guess that's a question. How do you know? Well, if you're buying locally, you know, I guess.
Well, you know it's local because you bought it locally.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we
I just
should,
threw those.
I'm sorry,
Go ahead.
please. Oh, I think that we should add weight for minority and women-owned businesses.
I like it.
Just treat it like an extra bullet point. And we don't even have to put it in this section. We can collect, and I think we should collect demographic data in the application.
Can we?
Remember that one of our program documents is the evaluation factors. So we have a list of things. You can weight them equally. You can give others higher points than others. And then you can have an extra, add 5 points for either being a minority or female business enterprise or buying a substantial portion from MFBs, however you want to word it. But my thought was that you give extra points for it. I guess it amounts to the same thing. But somehow it strikes me better just to have it to be an add-on as opposed to a separate thing.
And
I was
honestly,
thinking about purchasing goods and services. I'm talking about applicant, will be either a female or minority-owned business as a criteria.
More than
Not
50%
necessarily
ownership.
Yeah, that's easy.
More than 50% ownership, David? Do you think about that? Because I've seen some that are skirting that law, just that they have a female on the company, but they don't own any part of it.
Sure. More than 50% ownership in women in the minority-owned businesses, whatever the wording.
So would you like
That's
me
fine.
to delete this bullet point here then?
Yeah, it's not about the purchasing.
Yeah, it's not about purchases. It's about, who owns the business.
Okay.
and the data will help us. It'll help us be sure that we're reaching the people in the community that we want to reach, and that we're not overlooking
Right.
the people in our community that really need the help. And so what we're creating is equity and not so much equality.
So would you like me to add here preference to?
I don't know the legal way to say it.
I don't know. I think I would put
I would not do that there. I would put it in the public benefit section
yeah.
as
Okay.
something that would be a added benefit by being female or minority.
So they're agreeing that they are, is that what you're saying? They agree that they are one, and you won't agree to that if you're not?
To certify that they are.
Yeah, but that would be only worth X points. I mean,
Right.
in other words, it's not a requirement. It goes into the weighting that they are female, minority, majority-owned businesses.
That's exactly right. In the discussion, we can leave this part alone. And in the discussion of the evaluation factors, say MFBEs will be awarded an extra blank points to their evaluation.
Well, it could be worth as many as any of the other bullets. I mean, you either fit into that category or you don't.
Right.
We're not requiring that they have all of these things, just that these are things we'll consider when.
But they would need to be, they would need to satisfy, an MFBE would need to satisfy at least one of the public benefit commitments, and they would get extra points as MFBE, but they'd still have to satisfy one of them.
Oh, so yeah. I see what
Right,
you're
it can't be
saying.
the only one.
That's
Yeah,
right.
okay.
Yeah. And how many of these bullet points will we be requiring?
One.
Just one?
Mhm.
One or more. Okay, I see it. Sorry.
So it's not a public benefit commitment. It's a it's a point, it's something that we're going to add on to when we're evaluating them. We have to ask the question, are you 50% woman or minority owned business? They answer yes or no. They get an extra point if they put yes, right?
Yes.
Are there any other public benefit commitments that we want to add?
That doesn't say 50%, but we want it to be 50%. So it doesn't have to be
At least
wholly
at
owned.
least-
I hear you. Just give me
they're
a
at
minute.
least-
So
Sorry.
they're a 50. Sorry, you guys are talking so fast. My brain doesn't move quite as fast as y'all, but that's good. I'm glad I'm surrounded with smart people. Okay, so they are an at least
They are.
50% woman or minority owned business. This will be a consideration for underwriting for,
Yeah, we're just not going to put it in that section.
okay.
It's not going to be a commitment.
Okay.
It's just a fact. They either are or they're not, and they get extra points if they are.
So right now, let's just put a comment on this and just put move elsewhere.
Yeah,
And we'll figure out where it goes later.
right. But there was one more that you had about the farm to table. Did you take that out completely?
I did, but hold on, I can pull it back up again. Hold on. Hold on, I'm cutting and pasting it from the other document.
Mhm.
No. I'll have to go back and retype it, y'all.
I'll read it to y'all.
Oh, that'd be great. Okay.
Okay, it's a special case for farm to table restaurant. Applicant will buy agriculture products from sources within the jurisdiction at a level not less than X% of operations pre-COVID. I wasn't
Okay.
really sure about that one. It seems like you can only check that if you're a farm to table restaurant. How many of those do we have in town? 6, 10 that talk about that? Erica, you're the expert on restaurants. I don't know. You're on mute.
The only one that comes to mind is Heirloom at the moment.
National does too, some, but
Okay.
Farm cart.
Farm cart.
it's just such a small thing. I think the buy local will get them unless you're trying to get extra points to these few restaurants.
Difficult too, because many of the farms that are supplying these restaurants are not within the jurisdiction necessarily.
Yeah. I say we take that one out. It's too
Yeah,
complicated.
my take is to take out the farm to table. What do you think? Anybody else have an opinion?
I like the spirit of it, but yeah.
That really would come under, we took that out too. No, that would come under
Local.
every effort to purchase locally.
Yeah.
Right.
It's the same, yeah. Like we're selling oysters. You can't find those here. And if you could, don't eat anything out of the water around here.
Yes.
Okay. So we can just leave that one out.
I'd leave that one.
All right. Well, good. So now we just have the allowable use stuff. And I didn't see anything there that seemed concerning to me.
What falls under accounts payable?
Bills.
So existing debt to other people?
Well, it said you can't use it for principal or debt, but interest payments, I would assume you can do. Yeah, it says interest. I think it's like, you ordered some merchandise or inventory, your cost of goods sold, you have invoices out, you can pay those.
Okay.
Seems
I'm
reasonable.
fine with all of those. Yeah, they
Yeah.
certainly go beyond PPP, but
It sure
in terms of
does.
what you can do with.
Mm-hmm.
So there are some limits as to what you can do with the money that you got from PPP and EIDL. And it limits well, I mean, we're not loaning that much money. So yeah, I guess it's really a moot point. Never mind.
I was fine with the rest of everything.
Yeah, I think I was too. Anybody else have any other concerns in this section? Just looking through it.
So the only thing that if we're going to eventually do the RFP and talk with a third party lender, then I think the interest, that we'll have to see what happens when we're talking with those types of lenders. I don't know, Dan, do you have any experience working with other groups that have worked with third party lenders and sort of knowing what that looks like?
To be a loan administrator, you mean?
Yeah, sort of what the ballpark is for what that tends to cost and how they determine the cost.
I don't have inside information on that. As I said before, these administrators are hard to find. Ilka, I think, is aware of one in Athens-Clarke that might be interested in doing this, again, for business development reasons, as we've discussed before. But it's one thing to be doing something like this. I mean, there's a finite number of these loans, and it's not like the PPP program. So if you're Wells Fargo or somebody, you're going to have a gazillion people trying to get PPP loans processed, and if you don't get paid for it, that's really, really bad. It's not as bad with a community bank with a relative few applications, but still, they're going to want to get paid something. And we're going to have to, all the money that we're going to have is this $1 million being provided by Athens-Clarke. So that's going to be diminished by the cost of setting the program up. So it matters. And I think what we need to do is to talk with, first of all, the local entity that's expressed interest, see what they would be willing to do for us and not offer a payment to start with. But if a payment is required, then we need to calculate what our maximum number would be and what the maximum payment would be, and then set that amount aside as a cost that's going to have to be paid sooner or later. If we aren't able to close with them, I have been trying to keep an eye on this, and I'm aware of 2 or 3 or 4 nonprofits that we can go to. But just because you're a nonprofit doesn't mean you don't charge.
Uh-huh.
So I'd like to keep it. This is one specific place where I'd really like to keep it local if we could. But I can't give you any number I gave you would just be a plucked from air number. It wouldn't be any good. So we need to find out.
So this morning I
interest
spoke
rate.
with, okay.
Oh, the interest rate?
Go ahead.
Well, I mean, the interest rate on an event of default, I think that ought to be 3%. Under the Georgia usury laws, you get into for smaller loans, you get into some interesting questions of interpretation if you start charging a lot of money for that. But the question is, what would our loan administrator charge? And they're not getting interest because it's not their money. They're getting a fee. And you can express that fee as interest if you're a borrower and paying it. But, we can't get the borrowers to pay this. And all we'd be doing is reducing the amount of loans, which are already pretty small.
Right. I think we also need to stipulate that this is a simple interest. So we know exactly what that percentage means. Per annum, it was in another, later in the document, it was specific. It mentioned simple interest loan.
Yeah, it needs to be simple interest. And again, for usury law reasons.
So you're thinking about 3%, Dan?
Yeah, if you wanted a higher number, I could probably get comfortable with it. If you're above $250,000, it can be anything you want to. But with loans this small, it needs to be simple interest. 1.5 is the number. I was talking about default interest.
Oh, gotcha.
Default interest. I'd leave the outgoing loan interest at 1.5. Most of these loans are 0%. And then I would just double it on if there's an event of default. If these folks don't pay these loans back, it's because they can't pay it back. But we're kidding ourselves if we think we're going to get default interest.
I
But,
know.
but we need to have it in there because that's just the right thing to do.
In a bankruptcy, where are we in priority if it's a authority loan versus like a credit card that they owe to Macy's?
We are an unsecured creditor along with all of their other unsecured creditors.
Good to know.
Yeah. Now, the recovery period loans are intended to be secured, and we haven't gotten to those yet. And I got to tell you, for a $7,500 loan or a $10,000 loan, it's one thing if it's personal property. That's just a pledge agreement, and you can put that in a note. You know, a note with a pledge in it and a UCC is all you need. But if it's real estate, you've got to have really a deed to secure debt. It's got to be executed with the requisite formalities. It's got to be recorded. So it's almost more trouble than it's worth, but it's in the document now for us to consider.
That to me would if we require some sort of pledge of, I mean, that's kind of like requiring collateral, isn't it?
It's exactly like requiring collateral. And if the borrower already has secured debt, it probably prohibits additional secured debt. So they have to go back to their lender and get consent. And if they didn't have a secured lender and we become a first priority secured lender and they have the opportunity to refinance or get a loan, then they're not going to be able to do that unless we subordinate, which we'd end up having to do.
I don't like the idea of asking for collateral for such a small amount. And I think it could hurt minority businesses that might not have anything to use as collateral.
Again, as a public body, there's questions about whether you're doing your duty if you make a loan without collateral in a situation like this. But I've done it so many times. I refuse to worry about it. I mean, we're not, you know, what we're trying to do is to get the money out and get the public benefit. And if we can get collateral, great. But I almost think it's not cost benefit justified for loans this size.
It seems like it'd be cheaper on the underwriting side for whatever mortgager we use if that collateral stuff is not in there, because it's less that they have to deal with.
Oh, incidentally, you don't have to have a phase 1 environmental site assessment if you make a secured loan, but before you foreclose, you ought to. And that's an additional cost. And, you know, I mean, if y'all are inclined to take out the collateral provisions during the recovery period, I would frankly tell you, I think that's a good thing.
That's what I vote.
We have a collateral waive, so.
I'd rather take it out so that we're not waiving something.
Okay.
None, or just put collateral none, right?
So what does personal guarantee waived mean instead of none? What's the difference there?
Same thing. I'd put none there. There, if you have a business entity, even if it's a one-person LLC, there's a difference between the LLC being liable on a note and the member being liable on a guarantee.
What does the no credit elsewhere thing mean?
That he's not indebted to other lenders.
But we can take that out because it's not relevant, right?
I'd put no requirement so that they don't ask. And so their other lender doesn't ask.
Is this something that the end person that's borrowing the money is looking at, or is this for the mortgage servicer, this information?
It'll be both, because remember, instead of having a loan agreement that the borrower will sign, he's going to, in my model, he would sign a note that would cross-reference this. So everything he's saying will be certified to us, and if he's making a false certification, that's an event of default. But we're not duplicating. If he does it one time and agrees to it one time, we won't repeat it in other documents, which is sacrilege in the lending world, but I think it's appropriate for what we're doing here.
Okay. All right.
I did have one, since it's on the screen, at the bottom of the screen, about the goals. It only refers to Athens-Clarke County Mayor and Commission, and I think we should say,
Oh,
and
thank you.
Mayor and City Council of Winterville.
Good catch.
And the same thing is true later on. There's another place where it's only references Mayor and Commission.
Thanks for spotting that.
Thank you.
So have we gone through pretty much everything in this first section? We do have, we do have new business, I think, or old business to revisit, and also reports. So I want to at least make sure that we get that done before we adjourn for the day.
Yeah, I was going to make the proposition that the rest of this document, where it's next phase lending, can we not deal with that right now, because that's not now? Can we come back to that and finish what we're doing for this emergency phase and then do that at another time? Like, not even in this whole batch of work we're doing right now?
Yes.
That way
Like
we can.
Idea.
Yeah.
The reason I put it in there is that I was hoping y'all would see that this could be an asset in the future. That was my main purpose for
Sure.
having it in the draft at all.
Yeah, that's good, because
I suggest we take it out.
Okay.
I'll pull it out and stick it in another document and stick it on the share drive and just mark it next phase.
Well, we're getting
Okay.
close.
Yeah. Any other comments about this section before we move away to other business?
Yeah.
All right. Not hearing any, so I don't need to have to motion to approve the edited document.
Well, we still had to come back to those financial requirements. We said we were going to revisit
Yeah,
that.
yeah,
next
you're right.
meeting.
All right. Well, let's just leave it as it is, and we will finish reviewing it and hopefully approving it by our next meeting. All right. Is everybody okay with that?
Yes.
All right.
Just, will we have the opportunity to review all the changes that we've made at length? Will it be in the drive?
Yes, after we hang up, after the meeting is over, I'll save this without the next phase, and I'll move the next phase to a second document, and both sets will be on the drive. Just look for today's date on this one.
Okay, thanks.
Sounds good. All right. The next agenda item is new business for the directors. Since Tim's not here, I don't know whether we need to deal with this at this point, but he did indicate that it's a possibility he could not serve as secretary. Did you get that sense from him, Milka?
From what he said, he basically said he'd be on the move today. It sounded like maybe he would be in transit from one place to another for today's meeting. And he just said he would need someone else to take the minutes. So I said I'd be glad to do that.
Okay, so we don't need to deal with any officer roles at this point.
I think it was just for this meeting.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. It's good to know. And any other new business that people want to bring to the JDA?
Not from me.
All right. Okay. Hearing none, let's, the next item is Ilka's staff report.
Okay, so just a real quick update related to potential third-party administrators. I was talking to a mentor yesterday and just telling him that we're working on the revolving loan fund, and he connected me to Small Business Access Partners, which is a lender based out of Gainesville. And I called and talked with her this morning. I don't think they would be a potential administrator, but she offered to connect me to Access to Capital for Entrepreneurs, which is a small business lender. So I might just talk to them and say, hey, do you do this sort of thing? What does it look like? If that is okay with y'all.
Mm-hmm. Maybe they could
Okay.
do a little presentation if you get them to talk to us.
I could ask them to do that. I
Okay.
think they also have a location, I believe, in Norcross.
That's good to me.
I just had a thought. If it comes down to it, if we can't find anybody else, we could go to one of these grant writers around the state because they're used to looking at financial information and credit underwriting, and they're certified in that. They don't normally do this, but they could. And it's part of, they should do it if we ask them to, because they rely on local governments and local authorities for business, and they should do it cheaply. So maybe put that in our back pocket in case we don't get lucky somewhere else.
We used, I can't remember if it was First American or Athens First when DDA began its loan program, and they were handling the underwriting for us for a fee.
Do you recall
First
the fee?
American was the local financial person that I had talked to that did express some interest.
Yeah, one of them did it for us, and it was it took a while to get set up, but now that they've already had the experience of working with the DDA, it might have.
So First American and Synovus are two other possibilities.
When I talked to Synovus, we didn't discuss it. It didn't come up. But when I talked with Rhodes McClanahan at First American, he asked the question, who will be administrating the loans? And I said, well, you know, the JDA will decide that, but we're going to recommend a third-party lender. And he said, well, you know, just so that you know, that would be something that we might be interested in doing. We would see it as sort of a business development opportunity.
I will say that when PPP came out, First American was one of the first ones to the table to say, hey, we can help you with this, but they were not prepared to actually take the applications very quickly. They were like, we want them, but we don't have the system to take them in yet. So would they be expected to build this application for us? Or are we collecting the information and giving it to them?
We can, it wouldn't be that hard to create an application based on the guidelines. It's really just a questionnaire based on the guidelines.
You would think that, right?
I hope so.
No, I don't know why it was so difficult.
Yeah.
But it was difficult for big banks and small banks to throw this application together for PPP.
Community was all over it for us, like day one. They reached out to us on April 3rd. And just, you know, because the guidelines from the government weren't.
And that may have been what the problem was the government side.
We just rolled with it, and they did too. So when things changed, we just made the changes that were required. They were great and very responsive.
What's community?
There's one over here in Winterville, like at the 5 Points.
Is it just called Community Bank?
Commercial, sorry. It's Commercial Bank.
Commercial Bank. Yes,
well,
Commercial Bank.
Maybe we should be talking to them.
I just sent Mike an email, the president over there, so he's very involved with the community. So I just sent him an email asking.
Are you working with Greg?
Mike Sale.
Okay, all right.
And they will work with people that don't have banking relationships with them already?
They want relationships.
That's good, because I mean, that gives them some public benefit. They get exposure to businesses they normally wouldn't have had anything to do with, and maybe we can use that to say, well, don't charge us as much because look at all these new client potentials you'll have.
Are credit unions under consideration at all, or are they too specialized?
If I can respond to that, but I just had another thought. A credit union ought to be able to do it too. But my thought was this: I don't know whether
I'm losing you, Dave.
Sorry. Can you hear me now? I didn't cut my mic off. Did I?
Yeah.
Am I back?
No, it was just buffering. Yeah, you're here.
Okay, sorry. Two things. Yeah, I think a credit union, the right credit union could do that. I mean, I've worked oddly enough with credit unions on some sophisticated stuff, including a new market tax credit deal. So the right credit union could do it. And the other thought is this: I don't know whether Athens-Clarke intends to hold the JDA's money, in which case it would be in an Athens-Clarke account. But we do have the ability to make a deposit if that money is to be transferred to the JDA. We have $1 million we could put in somebody's bank, which would be a lure to them to help us out.
without charging us anything because they would get money in their account.
Well, they would tell you that they would tell you a tale of woe about how they hardly get any interest on their loans. And
Well, would we get interest on that loan sitting in there, on that money sitting in there?
if
That's a
they
lot.
agreed to process the loans for free, I'd forget about the
That's
interest.
right.
It's a good trade-off.
That's what I'm saying. We trade off interest for them doing the loans.
Mm-hmm.
That sounds like a win-win.
Okay, so we got several avenues for underwriting to consider.
Potentially.
Anything else, Silke, in your report?
I don't think so, but I do have a question for direction. Is that something maybe that Dodd or Erica might want to just gently discuss with Commercial Bank, if that might be something that they generally, hypothetically speaking, might be interested in partnering on?
Yes, and I can connect them with you, Ilka, or however you want me to handle that. I can have the conversation with them once they respond to my email and connect you to Mike.
What would the group like to do? Would y'all like me to talk with them?
I prefer to have one focal point for
Okay.
getting that information rather than several people doing it.
Okay,
That's my
makes sense.
recommendation.
That'd be great, Dodd, if you wouldn't mind connecting me, that'd be good.
Sure.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, the last agenda is council report. Dan, you got anything to add?
I can guarantee you a very short council report because in 10 minutes I have to be on another call. Really just to mention a couple of things going on in the General Assembly. Usually authorities are interested in legislation, and if they're not, they should be. As we heard in one of my sidebars, Senator Tillery responded that he thought there would be a business safe harbor bill introduced having to do with liability protection with COVID-19. And that bill has been introduced and it is in the Senate and there has been a hearing on it. And if the leadership's behind it, I'm sure it'll pass. Another bill just got introduced today by the chair of Senate Appropriations, which would repeal virtually all of the economic development income tax credits, including the job tax credit. And again, Senator Tillery responded when I brought that up with him on the sidebar that, you know, some of these credits are, I mean, they're very effective, some of them, especially things like the film tax credit. We said, you know, if you had a chance of, you know, if you're going to furlough a teacher or save $3,000 or whatever it was on a tax credit, that's a difficult decision to make. But apparently it wasn't that difficult because the chair of the Senate Finance Committee has introduced a bill to do that. The betting is that it will not pass this year because things like that don't usually pass in 1 year, but that it's got legs, and that bill or something like it might pass next year. So that's important for economic development, and I'll keep you all posted on it. And there's probably more going on, but those are just the two highlights that have crossed my desk in the last couple of days. No further.
Okay. Thank you, Dan. I appreciate it. Before we adjourn, we need to schedule our next specially called meeting. So look at people's, do Wednesdays at this time, next Wednesday at this time work for folks?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so the proposal is to have a meeting from 3 to 5 on June 24th, June 24th.
Did
Everybody
you
agreeable
From
with
2
that?
to 5 or 3 to 5?
3, I said 3, yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Is that agreeable with everyone? Do you need to put forth a motion for that?
So moved.
Second.
All right. Who seconded it?
Erica.
Okay. All right. Any other discussion of our next meeting? All right, hearing none. All those in favor of meeting on the 24th from 3 to 5, say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed? All right. Unanimous agreement. So do we have a motion to adjourn?
I move that we adjourn.
I second that motion.
Okay, so Stephanie seconded and you firsted it.
Erica,
Okay.
sorry.
Oh, sorry. Okay, sorry. Okay. All right. All those in favor of adjourning, say aye.
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 Aye. Any opposed? All right. This meeting is adjourned. We'll look forward to seeing you guys. One other comment though. I'll send out an email asking for people if they have agenda items that they specifically want to talk about to get that to me by Sunday so that we can, get it into the public record by Monday. So I'll send out a reminder to everybody to get any specific agenda items that the directors might have to me, and then we can incorporate that for next week. All right.
Yes.
All right. Well, have a good the rest of your day, and see you in a week.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, bye.
Bye for now.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.